The kitchen carried a faint aroma of fried shallots and something slowly simmering over low heat, a dish that had been quietly bubbling since midday. She appears in every photograph from 1955 wearing a neatly pressed shirtwaist dress, her hair set for the entire day, the kitchen already warmed up since 9 in the morning, any town, any street, any American household. She never counted calories. She didn't scan barcodes. She didn't use meal tracking apps or sign up for any diet programs. She had a pot roast from the A&P store, a few carrots on the kitchen counter, and about 1 hour before her husband came home. That was the rhythm of life. Most of the meals she once ate have now disappeared or been replaced by modern versions that look similar but produce completely different results. And the very first one was never considered diet food. She never even called it that, and it cost almost nothing. What she used to eat, what it actually did to the body, and what has quietly replaced it over time. Before we get to number 10, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This is exactly the kind of story this channel was made to tell. Hit subscribe. Let's begin. Number 1. In 1955, the Borden milk truck rolled through her street before 6 in the morning. She could hear the clinking of glass bottles on the porch before any other sound filled the house. Borden's, Sealtest, Hood if she lived in New England. Whole milk with a thick layer of cream rising to the top delivered cold while the kitchen was still wrapped in darkness. She poured it into everything. Oatmeal coffee, the children's cereal bowls. She never looked at fat content on a label because at that time no one believed natural fat was something to fear. Fat was the reason people drank it in the first place. Whole milk created a natural feeling of fullness. It sent a signal to the brain that the body had received real nutrition. That feeling kept her full until dinner and reduced the need for snacking during the day. But by 1977, dietary guidelines began to say that fat was the problem. She switched to skim milk. What she didn't know was that many low-fat products had to be altered with additives to make them taste acceptable. She traded fullness for flavor. The carton was still in the refrigerator, but it was no longer the same food. The cream layer disappeared. She kept drinking something that looked like milk and slowly began to wonder why she felt hungry much faster than before. Number 2 was something she had been stirring into her coffee long before powdered coffee creamers appeared. Real cream in coffee. Coffee Mate was introduced in 1961. Before that, she used real heavy cream. Hood's Sealtest, a small pitcher sitting in the center of the breakfast table, poured from the very same bottle of milk delivered by the milkman that early morning. Real fat, real satiety, something the body recognized as natural nutrition rather than artificial flavor. She would drink 2 cups in the morning, and sometimes that alone was enough for breakfast, or at least enough to keep her from feeling hungry soon after waking. The fat in cream slowed the rise in blood sugar from whatever she ate alongside it. As a result, her energy levels stayed more stable throughout the morning. She didn't crash at 10 a.m. and reach for something sweet to recover from the dip in energy. Coffee Mate was a Nestle product made from corn syrup solids and partially hydrogenated vegetable oil. It was cheaper than real cream, lasted longer on the shelf, and was marketed as a modern convenient choice for busy American households. She chose it for convenience. But what disappeared was the natural fat that helped create a lasting feeling of fullness. In its place were corn syrup solids and trans fats, ingredients later linked to a range of metabolic health issues. 2 cups of coffee with real cream had once been how her morning began, and it kept her fuller than most people today would ever imagine. Number 3 was a dish she had been making for breakfast long before any packaged versions ever appeared on supermarket shelves. The pot made a soft bubbling sound. Not a rolling boil, just small bubbles slowly rising to the surface, and the kitchen gradually filled with a simple but comforting aroma. Steam rose from the stove, the smell of oats blending with warm milk and spreading through the room. She cooked oatmeal exactly the way her mother had taught her many years ago. 20 minutes on the stove, 1 cup of water, a small pinch of salt, and a little whole milk drizzled on top. Quaker oats had been in her family kitchen even before she was born. The round cardboard box with the Quaker man on the front still sat on the same shelf her mother once used. She did not eat oatmeal because a nutrition expert told her it was healthy. She ate it because it was inexpensive, kept her full, and provided enough energy for the entire morning without needing anything else. Whole oats or steel-cut oats have a low glycemic load. Natural fiber slows digestion and helps the body maintain steady energy for longer periods. The feeling of fullness could last 3 to 4 hours. She did not snack between breakfast and lunch because her body simply did not need more food. By the 1960s, Quaker began introducing instant oatmeal packets. By the 1970s, they were pre-sweetened with flavors like maple and brown sugar, apple, cinnamon, strawberry, and cream. Each packet contained nearly as much added sugar as a small candy bar. The oats were still there, the fiber was still there, but the added sugar stripped away much of the benefit of the original whole food. She once ate oatmeal as a real meal. What replaced it began to feel more like dessert than breakfast. Number 4 was the way she used leftovers from Sunday dinner, something very few families still do today. Sunday roast beef and the bones she never threw away. Sunday was always pot roast day. A 3-pound chuck roast bought from A&P or the local butcher was seared in a cast-iron pot, then cooked with carrots, celery, onions, and whatever vegetables were left in the garden. 4 hours over low heat. The fat from the meat slowly melted into the vegetables. The collagen from the connective tissue blended into the broth below. She ate the pot roast on Sunday. On Monday, she would eat the leftovers cold with a bit of mustard. By Tuesday morning, she would place all the bones into a pot of water, add an onion and a bay leaf, and let it simmer for hours. It was this slow cooking process that created a deep flavor and a natural sense of fullness far more than many modern meals. That broth became Tuesday dinner the base for Wednesday's soup and was usually gone by Thursday. What she was making was essentially bone broth, but she never called it that. She simply called it stock or nothing at all because it was just something people did with leftover bones after a meal. Pay attention to this detail because this is where the important part lies. Collagen and nutrients extracted from long-simmered bones supported digestion, created longer-lasting fullness, and allowed nearly every part of the food in the kitchen to be used. That kind of broth is now sold at Whole Foods for several dollars per container as a modern wellness product. Back then, those bones cost almost nothing. She was simply using what others might have thrown away. That frugal kitchen did not exist because she was trying to be perfect. It existed because food was what it was. The stove stayed hot and wasting food was simply not something families in America were expected to do. Item number 5 is the one magazines once called the perfect diet food, and in a way they were right. Full-fat cottage cheese, a familiar staple in the American women's diets of the 1950s. In 1952, Marilyn Monroe told Photoplay magazine that her lunch consisted only of cottage cheese and a bit of fruit. Just that. More than 40 million Americans were reading Photoplay at the time. By the end of the decade, cottage cheese had become the most frequently featured diet food in American magazines. Not because nutritionists were promoting it, but because the most famous woman in Hollywood was eating it in her own kitchen. Breakstones. Sealtest. Sometimes just store-brand versions packed in the familiar wax-coated paper containers. She would place it on a small plate with half a can Del Monte peach and call it lunch. Ladies' Home Journal and Good Housekeeping were publishing recipes with cottage cheese almost every month. It was cheap, easy to find, and kept you full thanks to its protein and natural fat content with almost no sugar. It was this simplicity that made many women at the time eat less without even trying. The protein in that lunch kept them from getting hungry in the afternoon. There was no need to keep snacks in a desk drawer because the body wasn't constantly demanding something sweet. Cottage cheese, a little fruit, a glass of Sealtest milk. That was enough to last until dinner. But then one day, cottage cheese started being sold as low fat. And when the fat was removed, food companies had to add something else to make up for it. What they added was often sugar. Low-fat cottage cheese contained more carbohydrates than the original full-fat version. The feeling of fullness that made it effective had actually come from the natural fat that had been removed. Women still bought cottage cheese because the container looked almost the same. But what was inside was no longer the same food they had been eating in the 1950s. Number 6 is bread before bread became something entirely different. Loaves of real fermented bread from small neighborhood bakeries. On Friday mornings, you could smell fresh bread being baked all the way from the street. Almost every neighborhood in America at the time had a bakery like that. The loaves were pulled from the oven before 8 in the morning, heavy with a dark crust wrapped in paper instead of plastic. She would bring it home while it was still warm, and the way it broke apart was completely different from the soft, airy Wonder Bread on supermarket shelves. It had structure, chew, and the feeling of real food. The kitchen would still smell like bread for hours after she placed the loaf on the counter. Wonder Bread was already everywhere at the time, but many families still baked their own bread on weekends or bought it from the corner bakery. And that kind of bread was different from industrial bread in ways that advertising could never fully explain. Slow fermented loaves tended to keep people full longer and reduce overall food intake during the day. That was real bread, the kind made through long fermentation with natural sourdough starter. A method that her grandmother once used, which produced bread with a lower glycemic index than mass-produced white bread. The fermentation process helped break down part of the starch before the body even digested it. Wonder Bread was called enriched because industrial milling had stripped away most of the natural nutrients in the original wheat grain. Vitamins were removed and then added back in synthetic form. The bread became softer, lasted longer on the shelf, and carried the taste of a mass-produced industrial product. Something designed for convenience more than nutrition. She ate bread with almost every meal, but she was not overweight. The bread she ate in 1952 was completely different from the sliced white bread that began filling American grocery carts in the 1970s. Number 7 is the type of fish she ate every week that many Americans have slowly stopped eating over time: sardines and other small fatty fish. Friday was always fish day. In Catholic households across the United States, it was practically an unchanging rule. But even outside Catholic families, the habit was just as common. Sardines packed in olive oil, King Oscar printed on the tin, eaten with Ritz crackers at lunchtime. Canned tuna from Bumblebee's Star-Kissed or chicken of the sea, mixed with a bit of Hellmann's mayonnaise and celery served on white bread. She didn't see this as a healthy choice. To her, it was simply the familiar lunch of millions of American families, costing only about 35 cents. Sardines and other small fatty fish are actually among the most nutrient-dense foods available, yet very few people today pay attention to them. Omega-3 vitamin D, calcium from the soft bones, vitamin B12, and complete protein. Omega-3 supports metabolism, reduces inflammation, and helps maintain a stable sense of fullness throughout the day. She ate them every Friday without ever reading a single nutrition article. But somewhere between 1960 and 1985, Americans began to stop eating sardines. The association with poverty, immigrant families, and things seen as outdated caused the habit to fade away within just one generation. The omega-3 is still there inside the same King Oscar tins, sitting on the lower shelves of American grocery stores. It's just that today, very few people still reach for them like they used to. Number 8 is what she kept in the basement, and it is still alive: fermented pickles and homemade sauerkraut. In the cellar are rows of ball mason jars. Cucumbers from the backyard garden were soaked in salt water with dill. Cabbage was shredded, mixed with salt, and tightly packed into crocks to ferment for weeks. Her mother did it. Her grandmother did it. And even into the 1950s, many American households still kept this tradition alive. But toward the end of the decade, Vlasic jars began appearing more and more on the shelves of A&P stores. The difference between her jars and the store-bought version was actually simple. Her pickles were still alive. Natural fermentation produced lactobacillus bacteria, the same beneficial microbes now sold in expensive probiotic capsules. These bacteria support digestion, balance the gut microbiome, and help the body naturally recognize fullness more clearly. The factory-made Vlasic jars were preserved with vinegar and heat processing, which completely destroyed most of the beneficial microorganisms inside. The two jars of pickles look nearly identical from the outside, but what's inside is no longer the same. The ball mason jars were eventually moved up to the attic. Number 9, half a grapefruit before breakfast. One of you commented under a dieting video that your mother ate half a grapefruit every single morning for her entire life. She never explained why. She simply did it, and she didn't need to explain it. Every American woman of that era understood it instinctively. The grapefruit diet, sometimes called the Hollywood diet, first appeared in the 1930s. By the 1950s, it was no longer just a passing trend. It had become breakfast. Half a grapefruit, a soft-boiled egg, and black coffee. Doctors recommended it. Good Housekeeping published versions of it. Ladies' Home Journal featured grapefruit plates in nearly every issue on weight control. Here's why it worked. Grapefruit is high in water and fiber, and it actually takes time to eat. Half a grapefruit before a meal physically takes up space in the stomach before the main course arrives. It slows down eating. It triggers fullness earlier. Without trying, she naturally ate less at breakfast, not because she was disciplined, but because there was simply less room left in her stomach. What replaced it? Grapefruit disappeared from the American breakfast table around the 1970s and 1980s. It was replaced by orange juice, which has roughly the same calorie content as a can of cola, but contains no fiber at all and is consumed in about 30 seconds instead of 10 minutes. The satiety mechanism was gone. The sugar remained. Half a grapefruit and a spoon, that was breakfast. She never called it a diet. Plastic jars moved into the refrigerator door of the modern kitchen. And at the same time, a quiet gut-supporting habit of generations of Americans slowly disappeared over time. Number 10. Eggs before eggs were seen as a health concern. In the early 1950s, millions of American families still kept a few chickens in their backyard. She might have had 4 or 5 hens wandering through the garden. Eggs were collected in the morning and cracked straight into a cast-iron pan before lunch. Or she bought them from a neighbor, the corner dairy shop, or a roadside farm stand. The yolks of those eggs were deep golden, almost orange, because the chickens ate grass, insects, and kitchen scraps, instead of standing on concrete floors eating corn their entire lives. This natural diet produced significantly higher levels of vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and beta-carotene compared to modern industrial eggs. A pasture-raised egg often contains nearly twice the omega-3 content and significantly more vitamin E than eggs from industrial farms. You could see the difference just by looking at the yolk color. But by the 1960s, eggs began to be blamed for cholesterol, especially the yolk. American women switched to egg beaters, ate egg whites only, and believed it was the healthy choice. Ironically, the part they threw away contained nearly all of the most important nutrients. And by that time, most eggs on the market came from chickens that had never seen sunlight. As a result, yolks became paler, and the real nutritional difference gradually disappeared. She cracked an egg open, and the yolk looked like a marigold flower. No one thought that mattered. At the time, people simply didn't yet understand what it meant. 10 dishes on this list are effective in part because of what they contain: inside natural fats, protein, probiotics, collagen, and omega-3. But they were also effective because they were eaten at fixed times at the kitchen table and in portions prepared by a home-cooked family kitchen. It was this steady rhythm that helped many American families maintain a natural weight for years. Not from single-use snack packages designed to be eaten without even noticing. Not in front of a television for hours with foods engineered with flavors that keep people reaching for more. When packaged foods began to appear, the kitchen itself gradually stopped being a place that closed for the night. And when that happened, these 10 dishes no longer had the same system supporting them as before. The entire structure that once made them effective, fixed meal times, the family table, the pantry door closing after dinner, slowly disappeared. Quiet evenings were gradually replaced by products designed to keep people buying week after week. She didn't have more willpower than anyone else. She simply lived in a kitchen that knew when the day of eating should end. There is a photograph somewhere in a family album. She is sitting by the familiar kitchen table. A bottle of Borden's milk behind the counter. A ball mason jar on the shelf. A cast iron skillet still sitting on the stove. She wasn't thinking about how many calories she had just eaten. She wasn't thinking about her weight at all. What she was thinking about was whether to use the chicken bones for dinner tonight or save them to make broth tomorrow. She never called it dieting. And neither does this channel. Subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.